The clock on the studio wall struck 2 in the morning. The constant hum of the sewing machine was the only sound breaking the silence of the vast room. Elena wiped the sweat from her forehead, with the back of a hand still clutching Taylor's chalk. Her eyes were bloodshot, yet her focus remained unshaken on the silk fabric she was molding into an evening gown. This was the autumn collection for the Adrian Velvet label. Everyone in the fashion industry knew the brand was at the peak of its popularity. However, no one knew that almost every pattern, cut, and intricate sequin detail was born from Elena's hands in this dimly lit room. The studio door swung open abruptly. Adrian walked in smelling of expensive perfume mixed with the scent of alcohol. He had just returned from a luxury watch launch party where he had been photographed with numerous models and socialites. "Elena, why isn't the gown for the main collection finished yet?" "The photo shoot is scheduled for 9 this morning," Adrian said without a greeting, his voice demanding. Elena stopped treading the sewing machine pedal. She turned slowly toward her partner of 7 years. "I haven't slept for 2 days, Adrian. This pattern is incredibly complex, and I'm working on it alone because you slashed my production assistant staff last month." Adrian snorted as he loosened his tie. He walked toward the cutting table, inspecting the fabric with a cold, judgmental gaze. "That's a classic excuse. You know yourself that our expenses are tight. I have to maintain the brand's image so it looks exclusive to investors. Besides, it's just sewing. You've done it thousands of times. Just sewing?" Elena set her scissors down with a sharp metallic clink. "Without my designs and my technical skills, this label would never have touched a Parisian stage. You know that, Adrian." Adrian gave a short, dry laugh, a sound that no longer carried the warmth from the early years when they started this business from zero. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Elena. People buy my name. They buy the charisma of Adrian Velvet, not whoever is holding the thread behind the scenes. You are part of operations, and operations must follow the CEO's orders." Elena fell silent. A sharp ache began to spread in her chest, not from physical exhaustion, but from the realization that the man before her had truly changed. Once, they started everything in a small boarding house room with a single old sewing machine belonging to Elena's mother. Back then, Adrian promised they would be the most influential power couple in the fashion world. But after success arrived, Adrian seemed to erase Elena's footprints from his own history of success. "Make sure the gown is on the front mannequin by tomorrow morning," Adrian continued, turning his back to head toward their luxury suite upstairs. "Oh, one more thing. Don't show up at the front area during the photo shoot. There are a lot of important media outlets coming, and I want them to focus on my collection, not see you looking dull from lack of sleep." The door slammed shut, leaving Elena in a suffocating silence. She glanced at the small calendar on her desk. Today was October 10th. It was her 30th birthday. She had hoped at least Adrian would remember, or perhaps offer a small hug as a thank you. Instead, all she received were orders and insults. Elena looked back at the silk gown in front of her. She had poured her entire soul into that fabric. For years, she had let Adrian take all the spotlight. She let him be interviewed by top magazines while she hid in the production warehouse to ensure every stitch was perfect. She remembered how often she canceled plans with her family just to help Adrian meet a deadline. She remembered selling her grandmother's heirloom jewelry just to buy the first batch of raw materials when their company nearly went bankrupt 5 years ago. All those sacrifices were now regarded as mere laborer duties by the man she loved. Elena tried to resume her work, but her fingers were trembling. For the first time, she felt that the thread she was sewing was not shaping a garment, but rather tightening a noose around her own neck. She realized that the bigger Adrian's name became, the less space remained for her. Suddenly Adrian's phone, left behind on the cutting table, vibrated. A message appeared on the glowing screen. Elena never intended to be intrusive, but the sender's name caught her eye. It was from a young model Adrian had recently recruited for their latest campaign. The message was brief yet devastating. "Thank you for the wonderful night, babe. When are you going to tell her that her position is no longer needed, both in the office and in your life? Elena's world seemed to stop spinning. All her exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by a cold void. She stared at the message for several minutes, making sure she hadn't misread it. It turned out the plan to discard her had been neatly arranged behind her back. Elena did not cry. She took a deep breath and released the sewing machine pedal for the final time that night. She stood up, took her private sketchbook that she always kept in a locked drawer, and tucked it into her bag. She looked around the studio that had been her home for years. The place was full of memories, but now every corner felt foreign and toxic. Elena knew that tonight was her breaking point. She would no longer be a shadow for someone who didn't even value her existence. With slow but steady steps, she turned off the studio lights one by one. She left the half-finished silk gown lying abandoned on the table. If Adrian felt his name was everything, then let Adrian prove it without the hands that had brought every design to life. Elena walked out of the building just as the sun began to rise on the eastern horizon. Inside her bag was only a sketchbook and a firm resolve. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew for certain she would never look back. The pain in her heart began to turn into a small but sharp spark of fire. Adrian thought she was worthless without his connections. Adrian thought she was just lucky to be by his side. But Elena knew a secret that Adrian failed to realize. A diamond remains a diamond even when buried in the dust, while an empty gold frame remains a valueless object without the gem in its center. The journey had just begun, and the fashion world would soon know the true identity of the genius hands they had been praising through someone else's name. That morning, the atmosphere at the Adrian Velvet headquarters was thick with tension. Elena had not returned to their apartment the previous night. She had spent the remaining hours in a cheap hotel near the station, trying to settle her shattered thoughts. At exactly 9 in the morning, she stepped into Adrian's office. She was no longer wearing her dull work clothes, but a crisp white shirt with her hair neatly tied back. Inside the room, Adrian was in a blind rage. 2 assistants stood with their heads bowed dejectedly in front of his desk. On the mannequin, the silk gown Elena had worked on the night before looked messy and unfinished. Adrian looked up as the door opened, his bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep immediately locking onto Elena with pure anger. "Where were you last night? Look at this." The photo shoot starts in 30 minutes and the main collection is still just a piece of scrap fabric, Adrian shouted, pointing at the dress. Elena did not flinch. She walked toward Adrian's desk and placed a white envelope and the apartment keys onto the expensive glass table. "I quit, Adrian. I am also canceling my employment contract as the Director of Operations and Design." Adrian fell silent for a moment, then a mocking laugh escaped his lips. He leaned back in his grand chair, staring at Elena as if the woman in front of him had just told the funniest joke of the year. "Quit? You think this is a television drama? You can't just quit. You have responsibilities here. Besides, without me, where would you go?" "I saw the messages on your phone last night," Elena said in a very calm but sharp voice. "About that model and about your plan to get rid of me. So I'm making your job easier. I'm leaving now." Adrian's face turned pale for a split second, but his massive ego quickly masked the shock. He stood up, walked around the desk, and stood very close to Elena. He tried to intimidate her with his height, a technique he always used to suppress other employees. "Listen, Elena, don't act childish over a small personal matter," Adrian said in a demeaning tone. "You might have a talent for sewing, but there are thousands of people like you out there. In this world, what sells is a big name. And my name, Adrian Velvet, is the reason these designs can sell for hundreds of millions of rupiah." Elena looked straight into Adrian's eyes. "Then prove it. Finish that gown yourself, manage the production team yourself, and face the investors coming tomorrow on your own." Cornered and fueled by erupting rage, Adrian grabbed Elena's shirt collar and then released it roughly. He pointed toward the exit with a trembling finger. His emotions exploded, his voice echoing through the glass-walled office space. "Leave if you want. Get out of here right now, Adrian screamed. But remember this one thing, Elena. Without my connections, without my name, and without my money, you are nobody. You are just a fringe seamstress with no future. I bad you. I'll be back begging on your knees in a month because you won't even be able to buy food. Several staff members outside stopped working and turned toward the source of the noise. They were shocked to see Elena, the woman who had been like a mother to them in the office, being cast out like a thief. Elena did not scream back. She simply picked up her bag containing her mother's old sewing machine, the only valuable thing she had secretly taken from Adrian's apartment earlier that morning. 1 month, Elena said briefly as she gripped the door handle. Let's see who will be begging whom in 30 days. Elena stepped out of the skyscraper without looking back. As her feet hit the sidewalk, she felt a breath of fresh air she hadn't felt in a long time. For 7 years, she had dedicated her life to building someone else's dream, and now she had to rebuild the ruins of her own. She headed to an old, long-abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. It was her mother's small, dusty legacy. There, Elena placed her old sewing machine on a weathered wooden table. The room was far from luxurious, a stark contrast to Adrian's studio filled with marble and crystals. But here, Elena felt she had total control. On the first day of her departure, Adrian immediately blocked all of Elena's credit card access. He also called several of the largest fabric vendors in the city, giving orders that no one was to sell materials to Elena if she showed up. Adrian wanted to ensure that Elena truly suffered and broke so that she would have no choice but to return and prostrate herself for forgiveness. But Adrian made one fatal mistake. He thought Elena's strength lay in the money and facilities he provided. He forgot that Elena's true power resided in her fingers, which could create miracles from a scrap of leftover fabric, and in her brain, which had designed the business flow of the company for the last 7 years. In her tiny house, Elena began to unpack her piles of old fabric. She cleaned her old sewing machine with a damp cloth, oiling the wheels until the sound became smooth again. She opened her sketchbook, crossed out the name Adrian Velvet from the front page, and wrote one new name in bold, firm letters, Lana. She took her mobile phone, created a new account on a social media platform, and began filming her hands as they cut the fabric. No fancy lighting, no expensive models, only fabric, thread, and pure skill. Elena was no longer making clothes to satisfy the ego of an arrogant man. She began to create garments that had a soul. Meanwhile, at the headquarters, Adrian began to realize that kicking Elena out was a catastrophic technical error. He didn't know where Elena kept the contacts for the specialized button suppliers from Italy. He also didn't know how to manage the production schedule, which was incredibly complex for the upcoming exhibition. However, his pride was too high to admit it. He was certain that in a few weeks, hunger would bring Elena back to his feet. Adrian smiled cynically while staring at the city view from his office window, completely unaware that in an old house on the outskirts of town, the diamond he threw away had just begun to be sharpened to be sharper than ever before. The first week of Elena's new life began with a haunting silence. Her mother's inherited house on the outskirts of the city felt biting cold as night fell. Rainwater began to seep through the ceiling in the corner of the living room, and the kitchen stock was down to just a few packs of instant noodles and a small bag of rice. This was the bitter reality she had to swallow after years of living in the luxury of a penthouse apartment with Adrian. Adrian had truly kept his promise to cut off all of Elena's financial access. All of her credit cards were unusable, and the balance in her personal account was meager because she had funneled almost all of her earnings back into the capital of Adrian's company. Elena sat in front of her old sewing machine, staring at the few banknotes she had placed on the wooden table. If she didn't produce something soon, she truly would become exactly what Adrian had predicted: a beggar. Instead of giving in to fear, Elena took action. She didn't go to the luxury fabric stores she usually frequented, knowing Adrian had already spread threats there. Instead, she went to a flea textile market located on the edge of town. There, she hunted for export surplus fabrics that had minor defects but still possessed high-quality fibers. With her expert eye, she managed to find rolls of pure linen and raw silk at incredibly low prices because the colors were considered out of trend. Elena hauled the fabrics home on public transportation. Her shoulders ached, but her spirit was ablaze. Once home, she began washing the fabrics using traditional techniques so their texture became soft and looked brand new again. She was no longer sketching complex evening gowns for the elite. This time, she designed something different, minimalist, functional, yet incredibly classy women's workwear. She named her first collection, the Survival Series. Elena realized that out there, many women like herself were struggling to build their careers and needed clothes that gave them confidence without having to pay an unreasonable price. She began cutting the fabric with extreme care, ensuring that not a single centimeter of material went to waste. While sewing, Elena recorded every step of her work using her old phone, propped up on a stack of books as a tripod. She captured the sound of scissors slicing through fabric, the rhythmic throb of the sewing machine, and the process of hand-finishing button details. She didn't show her tired face. She only showed the process of creating a masterpiece from scratch. Elena uploaded the video to her new account, Lana. She wrote a short caption, made from the scraps that were cast aside, for those who refused to give up. She didn't expect the narrative of struggle and honesty and craftsmanship to touch so many hearts. Within 2 days, the video began garnering thousands of views. People in the comment section started asking where they could purchase the garments. However, a new challenge emerged. While Elena was busy sewing, a courier arrived to deliver an official letter. It was a lawsuit from Adrian's lawyers. It claimed that all designs ever created by Elena were the intellectual property of Adrian Velvet, and Elena was strictly forbidden from using similar cutting styles in her new business. Adrian was trying to kill Elena's creativity before she could even take her first step. Elena read the letter with trembling hands. She knew this was an intimidation tactic to make her feel hopeless and crawl back to him. But Adrian had made a massive mistake. He assumed Elena could only duplicate what she had previously made for him. In reality, Elena's current style was more honest and raw, no longer restrained by Adrian's shallow market tastes. That night, Elena did not sleep. She overhauled all the patterns she had made. She created new pleating techniques she had never used before, something Adrian could not claim as his own. She worked with a controlled rage, transforming her heartache into every precise needle prick. On the other side, Adrian's life was showing signs of chaos. In his luxurious headquarters, he was screaming at his new production director because they couldn't find the supplier for the pearl buttons Elena used to use. The tailors at the factory also began to complain because the patterns provided by the new designers were incredibly difficult to understand and often mismeasured. Adrian began to feel that losing Elena was not just losing a lover, but losing the very foundation of his house. "Find her," Adrian ordered his assistant. "Find out where she's living and make sure she's aware of that lawsuit. I want her to feel suffocated until she realizes that only I can save her." Adrian did not yet know that in that leaky little house, Elena had just finished a white linen shirt that looked absolutely perfect. The shirt had no big brand logo, but anyone who saw it would know it was the work of a master. Elena took a photo of the shirt under the morning sunlight streaming through her small window. She had just received her first order from a legal consultant in the capital who had seen her video online. The money from that first sale wasn't enough to fix her roof yet, but it was enough to buy one more roll of fabric and a decent box of food. For the first time in years, Elena enjoyed her dinner with a sense of pure pride. She was no longer eating from Adrian's generosity, but from her own sweat. 7 days had passed. Elena was still not begging, and she began to realize that the 1 month Adrian gave her might not be enough to see her fall. Quite the opposite, that month would be the time for Elena to build a new throne upon the ruins of her past. Entering the second week, the bustle in Yelena's small house began to resemble a miniature factory. The once empty living room was now filled with stacks of fabric neatly organized by color. Elena learned to manage her time with strict discipline. She spent her mornings cutting patterns, her afternoons sewing, and her nights managing social media content and replying to messages from potential buyers. One major problem Elena faced was logistics. Because she didn't have a private courier like she did at Adrian's office, she had to walk 2 kilometers to the nearest post office every afternoon while carrying bundles of order packages. Though exhausting, there was a unique sense of satisfaction every time she attached a shipping label with the name Lena in it. One afternoon, a notification popped up on Elena's phone, its screen already starting to crack. A renowned stylist named Sarah, who often worked for top-tier celebrities, sent her a private message. Sarah admitted she had accidentally seen Elena's sewing process video on her timeline. She was interested in the white linen shirt Elena had posted a few days ago and wanted to buy it for one of her clients. Elena could hardly believe it. Sarah was a highly influential person in determining fashion trends in the country. Without wasting any time, Elena immediately prepared her best shirt. She ironed the fabric until not a single wrinkle remained, then packed it with recycled paper decorated with leftover silk thread. She tucked in a small, handwritten note about the philosophy behind the garment. Meanwhile, in the city center, the atmosphere at the Adrian Velvet office was growing increasingly heated. Adrian was facing a major crisis with an order from a large boutique in Singapore. 500 dresses that had just come out of the factory were rejected because the stitching quality was inconsistent. There were loose threads everywhere, and the shoulder patterns appeared asymmetrical. How can something like this happen? Adrian screamed while throwing one of the dresses onto his production director's desk. I'm sorry, sir. Until now, Ms. Elena was the one who performed the final quality check before the goods were shipped. The new team doesn't have the same level of precision, the staff member replied with a trembling voice. Adrian clenched his fists. He began to realize that the system he took so much pride in actually depended heavily on Elena's eyes and hands. However, instead of contacting Elena to apologize, his ego pushed him to take more aggressive action. He ordered his legal team to escalate the pressure on vendors so they wouldn't give Elena any room to grow. However, Adrian's strategy was too late. 2 days later, Sarah posted a photo on her private account, followed by millions of people. In the photo, a talented young actress appeared wearing Elena's white shirt while relaxing at a cafe. Sarah wrote a powerful caption. Sometimes true luxury doesn't lie in a flashy logo, but in the honesty of every stitch. Find this hidden gem, Elena. In less than 6 hours, Elena's social media account exploded. Thousands of new followers poured in. Orders were no longer coming in one by one, but by the dozens. Elena sat on her living room floor, staring at her constantly vibrating phone screen. She felt both happy and anxious. She knew she wouldn't be able to handle hundreds of orders alone with just one old sewing machine. Elena remembers several senior tailors who used to work under her direction at Adrian's factory. They were talented people who were also often underestimated by Adrian. With gathered courage, Elena began contacting them one by one. She offered a partnership with a profit-sharing system that was much fairer than what Adrian had provided. 4 experienced tailors agreed to help. They were willing to work from their respective homes to help Elena meet the shipping targets. Elena immediately sent the materials and patterns she had prepared to them using express delivery. Now, Lana was no longer just an escape project, but a business that was beginning to have a real foundation. This small success of Elena's naturally reached Adrian's ears. One of the office staff showed Sarah's post to Adrian. Seeing Elena's name praised by someone of Sarah's caliber made Adrian's face turn crimson with rage. He felt betrayed by his own industry. To him, Elena should have been suffering in the outskirts of the city, not celebrating success. Adrian tried to call Elena using the office number so he wouldn't be immediately blocked. After several attempts, Elena finally picked up the phone. Elena, I see you've started playing around with that cheap stylist, Adrian said, his voice trying to sound calm but filled with mockery. Don't think one photo post can save you. You still owe me a lot of legal explanations. Come back now, apologize, and I might consider withdrawing my lawsuit." Elena fell silent for a moment, listening to the voice of the man she once adored. Surprisingly, she no longer felt fear or heartache. Adrian's voice now sounded like a meaningless, minor annoyance. "Adrian," Elena replied in a very flat tone, "save your threats for your own lawyer. I'm busy preparing a new collection for next month. Oh, and one more thing. Don't ever call me again unless you want to talk about returning my personal belongings that are still left in the apartment." Elena hung up before Adrian could respond. She then turned off her phone and refocused on the fabric in front of her. She realized that the real challenge would arise in the third week, when she would have to prove that Lana was not just a passing trend, but a brand capable of shaking Adrian Velvet's dominance in the market. The lights in that small house continued to burn until the early hours of the morning. Elena no longer felt tired because she was no longer working to build someone else's throne. Every inch of thread she pulled was a step toward her true freedom. Fortune began to favor Elena as she entered the third week. The sales revenue from the orders promoted by Sarah flowed into her account in a significant amount. The first thing she did was not buy luxury items, but rather rent a small space on the second floor of an old building located in the artisan district. The place was once a textile warehouse, but for Elena, it was her first palace. She was no longer working alone. The 4 senior tailors she had previously contacted now officially joined her. They brought their own equipment and worked in an environment far more humane than the pressure of Adrian's factory. Elena provided them with fair wages and flexible working hours. The results were extraordinary. Every garment was crafted with deep respect for the material, producing quality that even surpassed the standards of luxury boutiques. On the other side, Adrian Velvet's headquarters was being hit by a massive storm. Adrian sat in his boardroom with a tense face. In front of him, a lead investor named Mr. Bramantio roughly dropped this month's sales report onto the table. The numbers inside showed a sharp decline. Their brand image was starting to be tarnished due to numerous customer complaints regarding loose stitching and inconsistent sizing. "Adrian, I invested in this brand because of its precision. But your last collection was a disaster," Mr. Bramantio said in a low yet threatening voice. "I hear rumors that the brain behind your technical side has left. If you cannot fix the production quality within the next 2 weeks, I will withdraw all capital and terminate our international distribution contracts." Adrian tried to defend himself by blaming the fabric vendors and his new team. However, Mr. Bramantio was no fool. He knew that a good leader should be able to control operations. After the investor left, Adrian vented his rage by sweeping everything off his desk until it was scattered across the floor. He felt suffocated by his own pride. Meanwhile, Elena began developing a new strategy for the Lana brand. She realized that she could not continue to rely on social media organically. She began approaching communities of women entrepreneurs and offered a sustainable clothing concept. She used eco-friendly fabrics and high-quality production scraps that were often discarded by large factories. One afternoon, Elena received an unexpected visitor at her new studio. It was Adrian's former personal assistant, a young woman named Maya. Maya arrived with swollen eyes and a resignation letter in hand. She described how the atmosphere at Adrian's office had become toxic since Elena's departure. Adrian had become extremely temperamental and often insulted staff in public. "Miss Elena, please let me work here," Maya pleaded. "I don't care if my salary has to be cut. I just want to work in a place that respects human beings." Elena paused for a moment. She knew Maya was an incredibly skilled and organized administrator. Maya's presence would greatly assist Elena in managing the cash flow and the increasingly dense production schedule. Elena shook Maya's hand and welcomed her as part of the team. Now, her small team had a stronger structure. The bustle at the Lana studio became a productive daily sight. They began working on a small collection named Rebirth. This collection consisted of 10 essential designs that could be mixed and matched for various occasions. Elena ensured every detail, from the choice of buttons to the inner lining, was absolutely perfect. She wanted to prove that quality does not always have to come from a giant factory. News of Elena's new studio finally reached Adrian's ears through Maya, who was accidentally spotted by one of Adrian's couriers. Learning that Elena was not only surviving but actually thriving, Adrian felt his ego being torn apart. He immediately instructed his legal team to send a second cease and desist letter, this time with a claim for damages over alleged theft of trade secrets. She thinks she can win with just a small studio in an old building, Adrian muttered while staring at a photo of Elena's studio taken secretly by his hireling. I will make sure not a single mall will accept her products. However, Adrian did not realize that the market was beginning to change. Consumers were getting bored with big brands that only sold their name without quality. When the letter reached Elena's hands, she no longer trembled as she once did. With the help of an old friend who worked as a lawyer, Elena instead used the letter as motivation to accelerate the launch of her collection. Elena decided to do something very bold. She invited several fashion editors and buyers from independent boutiques to come to her small studio to see the production process firsthand. She wanted to show transparency and dedication behind every stitch. This move was a stark contrast to Adrian, who always hid his production process in closed factories. That night, after all her staff had gone home, Elena sat on her studio's small balcony. She looked at the city lights in the distance, including the top of the skyscraper where Adrian's office was located. 19 days had passed since she was kicked out. She had not returned to beg, and she began to feel that she was much stronger than she had ever imagined. Elena took her notebook and crossed out one line of completed tasks. Below it, she wrote a big plan for next week, the launch of an independent e-commerce site. She knew that a direct confrontation with Adrian would happen soon, but this time she would not face him as a fearful employee, but as an equal competitor. The 21st day became the most thrilling turning point for Elena. That morning, the independent e-commerce site for the Elena brand officially went live. Without an expensive advertising campaign, Elena relied solely on the power of the story she had been building on social media. She featured short videos showing the faces of her tailors, details of the eco-friendly fabrics used, and the philosophy behind every garment designed to empower the wearer. The results were staggering. Within the first 2 hours, half of the Rebirth collection stock was sold out. Maya, who now managed the administration, kept cheering every time a new order notification popped up on their computer. The studio phone also began to ring incessantly from independent boutique owners wanting to collaborate as official distributors. Elena felt the burden that had long weighed on her shoulders slowly lift, replaced by overwhelming gratitude. Meanwhile, at a luxurious convention center in the heart of the city, Adrian was preparing for his annual national fashion show. This was the event meant to prove that the Adrian Velvet brand remained the market leader. Adrian had invited hundreds of VIP guests, including investors, fashion critics, and celebrities. He had spent a fortune on stage decor, lighting, and top-tier models. However, behind the scenes, the atmosphere was chaotic. Adrian looked frustrated because several key gowns appeared stiff when worn by the models. Without Elena's final touch, she usually adjusted the fabric drapes directly on the model's body. The clothes lost their elegance. Adrian continued to bark at his new design team, accusing them of incompetence, unaware that his own conflicting orders were what confused them most. As the show began, loud music filled the room. Models started walking down the runway wearing Adrian's latest collection. However, the audience's response was not as expected. Fashion critics sitting in the front row began to whisper. They noticed a visible decline in quality. Inconsistent patterns, forced stitching, and designs that felt like repetitive echoes of previous years. The climax occurred when a lead model walked to the center of the stage in a maroon evening gown. As she spun, the seam on the side of the dress suddenly ripped due to excessive tension on the wrong fabric. The incident was captured by dozens of journalist cameras and instantly became a trending topic on social media. Adrian, standing in the wings, turned deathly pale. He realized that the reputation he had built over many years was crumbling before his very eyes. Ironically, at almost the same time the invited guests began checking their phones. News of the successful launch of the Elena website began to spread among the fashion enthusiasts present. Several prominent magazine editors even openly showed interest in Elena's work, which was considered far fresher and more honest. The contrast between Adrian's massive failure and Elena's brilliant emergence became an unavoidable drama. After the event, Mr. Bramantio, the lead investor, approached Adrian backstage. He did not offer congratulations. Instead, he gave a cold stare. "Tomorrow morning, I want an audit team to examine all your financial and operational reports, Adrian. This show was an insult to the standards I expect. It seems you have truly lost the soul of this company." Adrian was unable to answer. He sat in a cluttered dressing chair, surrounded by the remnants of luxury that now felt hollow. He remembered the words he had spoken to Elena 3 weeks ago about how she would be begging him within a month. In reality, as they entered only the 3rd week, he was the one who felt like he was losing everything. That night, after the final orders for the day were packed, Elena took her small team out for dinner at a simple eatery near the studio. There was no expensive champagne or lavish banquet, but the laughter and pride they felt were very real. Elena saw the faces of her tailors, who looked happy because their hard work was being properly valued. "We aren't finished yet," Elena said, raising her glass of mineral water. "This is just the beginning. We must maintain our quality and remain humble. Our goal isn't to bring anyone down, but to build something of true value." Maya nodded in agreement. "Miss Elena is right. Tomorrow we have an even longer list of orders. Several large boutiques from out of town have already sent letters of interest for collaboration." Elena smiled. She felt very peaceful. She no longer harbored a burning grudge against Adrian, as she was too busy loving what she was currently building. However, she also knew that Adrian was not the type to give up easily. Today's failure would surely make him more desperate, and he might resort to even dirtier tactics to bring her down. When Elena returned to her small house, she looked at the calendar on the wall. There were still 9 days left of the 1-month period Adrian had given her. She turned off the bedroom light with a sense of relief. The diamond that was once covered in dust was now beginning to show its brilliance, and no one could cover it in darkness again. The chaos at Adrian's fashion show became the headline in various lifestyle media outlets. The photo of the dress tearing on stage turned into a symbol of the downfall of a brand that had long been considered perfect. Adrian, unaccustomed to failure, began to feel cornered. Instead of conducting an internal evaluation, he searched for a scapegoat. To him, all this misfortune began the moment Elena left, and he could not accept the reality that Elena was actually rising toward success. Adrian contacted an informant broker who typically operated in the dark corners of the textile industry. He ordered the individual to find out the primary fabric supplier used by the Lana brand. Adrian intended to buy up the entire stock of that fabric, or, at the very least, pressure the supplier to terminate their contract with Elena. He wanted to halt Elena's production exactly when market demand was at its peak. Adrian was certain that without raw materials, Elena would fail to fulfill orders, and her reputation would be instantly destroyed. At the Elena studio, Elena was facing a different challenge. An email arrived from a representative of a global online retail store based in London. They were interested in an exclusive collaboration, making Lana one of the featured brands for an international women's empowerment campaign. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, the requirements were heavy. Elena had to be able to produce 2,000 pieces of clothing within 6 weeks under very strict international quality standards. 2,000 pieces in 6 weeks. Maya stared at the computer screen with wide eyes. "We need more people, more machines, and most importantly, a stable fabric stock, Ms. Elena." Elena nodded calmly. She had predicted this. However, that afternoon, bad news arrived. Elena's regular linen supplier called with a voice that sounded anxious. He informed her that the entire stock of fabric usually ordered by Elena had been bought out by another party at double the price. Not only that, the supplier also subtly mentioned that he could no longer work with Elena for an indefinite period. Elena immediately realized this was Adrian's doing. The man was no longer using legal channels but a direct attack on the jugular of her business. The studio staff began to panic. If they didn't get the fabric by tomorrow, the production process for orders already paid for by customers would stop, and the global collaboration plan would remain only a dream. However, Adrian forgot that Elena had spent years building good relationships with local artisans, not just transactional business connections. Elena did not give up on one large supplier. Instead, she went to a remote weaving village that she had once helped when they were nearly out of business a few years ago. There, the artisans had a stock of hand-woven fabrics that were beautiful but rarely exposed due to their isolated location. "We have always kept the best fabric for you, Elena," said one of the elder artisans there. They were willing to provide their stock on a credit payment system because they believed in Elena's integrity. This fabric was actually much more exclusive and had higher artistic value than the factory-made fabric Adrian had monopolized. Elena returned to the studio with a triumphant smile. She decided to change the strategy for her global collaboration collection. She would no longer use ordinary linen. Instead, she would use this exclusive hand-woven fabric. This move caused the market value of the Lana brand to skyrocket in the eyes of the London retailers because of the elements of cultural storytelling and sustainability. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his warehouse filled with rolls of linen he had snatched from Elena. He felt victorious until his assistant walked in with news that Elena had secured an international collaboration contract with a global brand. Adrian was stunned. He looked at the piles of fabric in his warehouse, which now felt like a mountain of expensive, useless junk. He had wasted a vast amount of money just to sabotage something that proved to be unstoppable. Adrian's ego was further wounded when he saw a news report on television interviewing the representative from the London retail store. They stated that Lana was the future of fashion because it managed to combine modern aesthetics with the empowerment of local artisans. Elena's name began to be mentioned as a new icon, while the name Adrian Velvet began to sink under a pile of customer complaints and quality scandals. The peak of Adrian's frustration occurred when his main investor, Mr. Bramantio, returned without notice. This time, he brought a letter of investment cancellation. Mr. Bramantio had seen greater potential in new, more innovative brands. Openly, he expressed his admiration for Elena's very organic and solid growth. "You were too busy managing your former employee that you forgot to manage your own business, Adrian," Mr. Bramantio said cuttingly before leaving the room. The 25th day was drawing to a close. Adrian stood alone in his spacious office, looking at his reflection in the glass window. He looked old and tired. On the other side, Elena sat with the weavers, discussing new designs that would shake the international market. Elena proved that when someone tries to close one door on her, she possesses the key to open another door that is much larger. Regret began to creep into Adrian's heart, but it had not yet reached its deepest point. He still had one last card he would use to try and destroy Elena personally. However, he did not know that the Elena of today was no longer a woman he could control with harsh words or empty threats. Desperate because his fabric sabotage failed, Adrian began searching for even lower ways to bring Elena down. He knew that Elena's only weak point was her elderly mother, who lived in a small, distant town. During their 7-year relationship, Adrian had almost never visited her, always using busyness as an excuse. But now, he sent his assistant to bring luxury hampers and flowers to her home, pretending their relationship was fine and that they were planning a grand wedding. Adrian called Elena's mother, using his most friendly and manipulative voice. He lied, saying that Elena was under immense mental pressure from her heavy workload and needed his guidance again. He hoped her mother would persuade Elena to come home and give up. It was a cunning plan because Adrian knew how much Elena valued her mother's opinion. However, Adrian underestimated the bond between mother and daughter. That afternoon, Elena's mother called her. "Elena, Adrian called me this morning. He said you were sick and your business was failing. He even sent many expensive gifts here." Elena fell silent for a moment, suppressed anger rising in her chest. She explained the true situation to her mother without hiding a single detail. She told her how Adrian had kicked her out, insulted her, and was now trying to use her family to manipulate her. "Don't accept anything from him, Mom. Send all those gifts back. I don't need help from a man who tried to destroy my life." Hearing her daughter's honesty, her mother gave her full support. "I know you are strong, my child. Don't let him scare you again. I already sent all his things back this afternoon via courier." Adrian's manipulation attempt failed completely. In fact, that cowardly act only made Elena more determined to cut all remaining emotional ties to her past. Elena realized she needed stronger protection, not just operationally, but more solid financial and legal safeguards for the Elena brand. At just the right time, a significant meeting took place in Elena's small studio. A middle-aged man in a very simple but perfectly tailored suit came to visit. He introduced himself as a representative from a venture capital firm focused on empowering the local creative industry. The man had been monitoring Elena's progress since Elena's first video went viral. "We like the way you manage conflict and how you continue to prioritize local artisans amidst market pressure," the man said. He offered a fresh injection of funds that was massive, far larger than all the capital Adrian had ever owned in his early years of business. Interestingly, this investor offered a very fair partnership system. Elena would retain full control over the creative direction and strategic decisions of the company, while they would provide financial support and access to a global distribution network. Elena saw this as a golden opportunity to scale her production and challenge Adrian's dominance more professionally. After reviewing the contract with her lawyer, Elena signed the agreement. With that fresh capital, her first move was to rent a large warehouse in an industrial area with high-level security facilities. She also purchased 10 state-of-the-art sewing machines to help her team work faster without sacrificing the quality of the hand-stitching that was her trademark. Elena also began recruiting more staff, including several former marketing managers from competing firms who were drawn to Elena's vision. The small studio in the old building transformed into a dynamic headquarters. Maya was appointed as the chief operating officer, while Elena remained the lead creative director. News of the massive funding for Elena spread through the industry like wildfire. The name of the secret investor turned out to be one of the wealthiest individuals in Asia, who very rarely invested in new fashion brands. This boosted Elena's credibility to a level she had never imagined before. Adrian heard the news while he was trying to persuade a bank to provide an additional loan to cover the losses of his failed production. The bank politely declined his request because they saw that Adrian's company yes-debt ratio was becoming unhealthy. Adrian felt like his world was turning upside down. The woman he once called a seamstress now had financial backing far stronger than his own. The 28th day had arrived. Adrian's regret began to turn into real fear. He saw digital billboards in the city center featuring Elena's face as the new ambassador for the sustainable fashion movement. In the photo, Elena looked authoritative and beautiful in a garment of her own design. There was no trace of the exhaustion or the dull aura Adrian used to mock. Elena had truly transformed into a sharp, sparkling diamond. She was no longer thinking about how to survive day to day, but how to build an eternal legacy. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his dark office, realizing that the words he spoke a month ago had become the deadliest weapon against himself. His time was almost up, and all doors to return to the past were tightly shut. The 29th day brought a collapse that could no longer be delayed for Adrian's business empire. The news of Mr. Bramantio withdrawing his capital was merely the beginning of the other dominoes falling. That morning, tax officials and legal receivers arrived at the Adrian Velvet headquarters. The financial reports, which had always looked magnificent, turned out to be hiding deep dead holes, a fact that had been successfully managed by Elena's meticulousness during her time as operational director. Without Elena to manage the cash flow and negotiate vendor payments, Adrian had become trapped in his own lavish lifestyle using company funds. Now, his assets were being frozen. The sports car he took so much pride in was seized, and the penthouse apartment where he had kicked Elena out was now under bank supervision. The remaining staff began to leave the office one by one after hearing that their salaries for the month would not be paid. Adrian sat at his desk, which now felt vast and cold. He stared at his reflection in the dark monitor screen. He looked dull, disheveled, and much older than his actual age. Bankruptcy was no longer just a threat. It was a reality knocking at his door. In his desperation, Adrian's ego, which had always been sky-high, finally cracked. He realized he had no one left to turn to for help. His party friends vanished as soon as they heard his name had been blacklisted by the banks. The only name that kept surfacing in his mind was Elena. Adrian convinced himself that Elena must still have some feelings for him after their 7 years together. He thought that if he approached her and showed his fragile side, Elena would soften and agree to merge the Lana brand with his dying company. It was a naive thought, but it was the only hope he had left. That afternoon, Adrian went to Elena's new studio using an online taxi because he no longer had a private driver. He was shocked to see Elena's office building, which looked modern and was filled with fast-moving staff with enthusiastic faces. Security there was tight. He was held up in the front lobby because he did not have an appointment. "Please tell Elena it's Adrian." "It's urgent," he told the receptionist in a voice that was barely a whisper. The receptionist looked at Adrian with an unreadable expression, then contacted Maya through the internal line. A few minutes later, Mia came down to the lobby. She was wearing a suit made by Lana that looked incredibly professional. There was no longer any fear on Maya's face as she looked at her former boss who used to shout at her. "Elena is busy preparing for tomorrow's pop-up store launch, Adrian. She doesn't have time to meet with you," Maya said coldly. "I only need 10 minutes, Maya. Please, this is about the future of our business," Adrian pleaded in a pathetic tone he had never shown before. Maya smiled thinly, a smile full of irony. "Our business? As far as I know, that business was destroyed by your own arrogance. And Elena is no longer someone you can call whenever you feel like it." "But fine," she said, "you can wait for her at the cafe across the street after work hours." Adrian waited in that cafe for 3 hours. Every passing minute felt like a torture to his pride. He saw luxury cars arriving at Elena's office building, carrying investors and journalists attending the preview of the latest collection. He saw Elena exit the building, surrounded by her assistants. Elena looked radiant, wearing an elegant cream-colored gown. She looked like a queen who had just won a great battle. Elena walked into the cafe and sat across from Adrian. She didn't order anything. She simply looked at Adrian with a flat gaze, as if she were looking at a stranger she had accidentally bumped into on the street. 29 days, Adrian," Elena said, opening the conversation. "There's only 1 day left of the time frame you gave me to come back begging to you. So what is the purpose of your visit?" Adrian swallowed hard. His voice trembled as he began to speak. "Elena, I know I made a mistake. I'm in a difficult position. The bank seized my office, and the investors withdrew. I need you back. We can fix this together. Lana has great potential, and with my name, we can save everything." Elena almost laughed at the offer. "You still think your name can save me?" "Adrian, your name is now poison in this industry. Everyone is talking about your failure and your poor quality goods. You didn't come here to save me. You came because you've already sunk, and you're trying to pull me down with you. I still love you." "Elena," Adrian said, trying his last and lowest card. Elena shook her head. "You never loved me. You only loved what I could do for you. You loved the comfort I provided so you could look great in front of others. Now that all of that is gone, you feel you need me again. But unfortunately, I no longer need you." Elena stood up. about to leave the cafe. Adrian tried to reach for Elena's hand, but Elena quickly pulled away. "Don't ever touch me again," Elena stated firmly. "Tomorrow is the 30th day. I will be opening my largest pop-up store in the city center, right across from your boutique that is about to be seized. Come if you want to see what it feels like to stand on the winning side without having to destroy anyone else." Elena walked out of the cafe without looking back. Adrian sat slumped in his chair, realizing he had just lost everything, including his last bit of dignity. He saw Elena get into her luxury pickup car, leaving him behind in the small gloomy cafe. Tomorrow would be the final day of the foolish bet he had made, and he already knew who would truly be on their knees at the end of this story. The 30th day arrived with exceptionally clear weather. In the most prestigious shopping district in the center of the city, the atmosphere presented a sharp contrast between the two sides of the street. On the left side, the flagship Adrian Velvet Boutique appears silent, with a bank seizure notice plastered on its large glass doors. Several security guards stood watch in front of the building, which no longer had electricity. Meanwhile, on the right side, a luxurious temporary shop or pop-up store belonging to Lana stood grandly, surrounded by a red carpet and rows of congratulatory flower bowls that overflowed onto the sidewalk. Hundreds of people had been queuing since early morning. They were loyal customers who had followed Elena's journey on social media, as well as fashion collectors curious about the viral hand-woven collection. Dozens of journalists from national and international media gathered in front of the entrance, preparing their cameras to capture the appearance of the genius designer who had just shaken the industry. Elena stood inside the store, checking every corner of the room one last time. The shop was designed with a minimalist yet very elegant concept, reflecting honesty and strength. She looked at her team, from Maya to the senior tailors who now wore neat uniforms, all looking immensely proud. There was no longer any fear on their faces. They knew that today was the proof of the hard work and tears they had shed over the past month. At exactly 10 in the morning, the store doors opened. Elena stepped out to perform the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The camera flashes were blinding, yet she remained standing tall with a calm smile. It was then, amidst the crowd, that she saw a very familiar figure. Adrian stood there, in the back row of the spectators. He wore a shabby jacket and a hat pulled low, trying to hide his haggard face from the pursuing reporters. Adrian witnessed with his own eyes how the important figures he once idolized were now clamoring to shake hands with Elena. He saw Mr. Bermentio, his former lead investor, laughing familiarly while congratulating Elena. Adrian felt like an invisible ghost in the middle of a party that should have been his, if only he hadn't discarded Elena a month ago. The launch event was a massive success. Within the first 3 hours, almost the entire exclusive Lana collection was sold out. Some buyers were even willing to place pre-orders for the next collection, even though the prices were not cheap. Elena proved that the market does not just buy a brand. They buy integrity and consistent quality. In the midst of the bustling event, Elena noticed Adrian trying to approach the VIP area. Several security guards immediately blocked his path, because Adrian did not have an official invitation. Seeing the minor commotion, Elena signaled the guards to let Adrian in. She wanted to conclude this chapter openly and honorably. Adrian stood before Elena with trembling hands. He no longer had the harsh words or mockery he used to hurl. Around them, journalists began to notice Adrian's presence and started pointing their cameras. This was a deeply humiliating moment for Adrian. A former fashion king now standing before his victim as the defeated party. "Elena," Adrian whispered, his voice nearly drowned out by the noise of the room. "I see your shop. Everything is perfect. You were right. I was wrong to judge everything." Elena looked at the man without hatred, but also without pity. "1 month ends today, Adrian. You said I would come back begging to you. But in reality, I found my life again after you kicked me out. Thank you for forcing me to stand on my own 2 feet." Several journalists tried to move closer to get a statement from Adrian regarding his bankruptcy, but Adrian only looked down. He felt very small inside the vast store. The luxury surrounding him now felt like a hard slap to his shattered ego. He realized that he had not only lost a great designer, but he had lost the only person who had ever truly and sincerely supported him from zero. Elena then called one of her assistants and asked for a small envelope. She handed it to Adrian. Inside was a single coin and the address of a job training foundation. I cannot help you save your company because that is the result of your own actions. But if you truly want to start again as a new person, start from the bottom just as I did a month ago. Adrian accepted the envelope with a limp hand. He turned and walked out of the store, passing through the crowd of people who no longer recognized him. He walked toward the other side of the street, stood briefly in front of his dark and locked boutique, and then continued walking aimlessly. The arrogant words he had spoken in the office a month ago kept ringing in his ears, becoming the greatest regret he would carry for the rest of his life. That night, after the shop closed, Elena sat alone on her studio sofa. She looked toward the large window displaying the sparkling city lights. She had won the bet, not by destroying Adrian physically, but by proving that a human's value cannot be determined by someone else's arrogance. The journey of Lana had only just begun, and this time, the diamond would continue to shine without ever needing to hide in anyone's shadow again. After the massive success at the pop-up store, Elena's name became the most sought-after commodity in the regional fashion industry. However, she did not let popularity make her careless. Instead, she further tightened the operational standards at the Lena headquarters. The first week after the launch was filled with marathon meetings with the logistics team and partners from London to prepare for international expansion. Elena wanted to ensure that every piece of woven fabric sent to Europe had the exact same quality as what she used to sew in her small studio. Maya now served as the full-time chief operating officer. She managed a team that now numbered 30 people. The working atmosphere at Lana was vastly different from Adrian's high-pressure office. Here, Elena implemented a system of transparency. Tailors were given space to provide input on designs so that products were not only beautiful to look at, but also comfortable to wear. This spirit of togetherness was what allowed their productivity to double in a short time. On the other side of town, Adrian's life had changed drastically. He now lived in a small rented room in a densely populated area. All of his luxury goods had been seized to cover part of the company's debts. Every day, he had to deal with calls from the court regarding lawsuits from unpaid vendors. The Adrian who used to wear suits worth tens of millions of rupiah now only owned a few pieces of simple clothing that were starting to look dull. One morning, Adrian stood in front of a small, cracked mirror in his room. He remembered the envelope Elena had given him on the last day of that 1-month period. Inside was the address of a job training foundation and one small coin. Initially, Adrian's ego rejected the help. He saw it as an insult. However, hunger and the reality that not a single fashion company wanted to hire him left him with no other choice. Adrian approached the foundation with hesitant steps. The place was a training center for people who wanted to learn technical skills ranging from basic sewing to warehouse management. The owner of the foundation was an elderly woman who was Elena's longtime mentor. She looked at Adrian with a sharp but non-judgmental gaze. "If you want to learn, leave that CEO mask outside the door," the old woman said firmly. Adrian began working as a warehouse assistant at the foundation. His job was to lift heavy rolls of fabric, record thread stocks, and clean the floors after the training classes ended. This work was a stark contrast to his old life, where he only had to point and command. His once smooth hands were now becoming rough and scarred. However, for the first time in years, Adrian began to understand the physical process behind a garment. He began to realize how heavy the burden was that Elena had been carrying alone all this time. Meanwhile, Elena was on a plane bound for London. She had been invited to be a keynote speaker at a world fashion conference. There, she presented the concept of ethical glamour. She explained how a brand could be commercially successful without sacrificing the welfare of artisans or damaging the environment. Her presentation received a standing ovation from global industry leaders. The Lana name was officially recognized as a global brand with a bright future. While in London, Elena took the time to visit a high-end boutique that now displayed her hand-woven collection in its main window. She stood on the sidewalk staring at her own work standing alongside the world's legendary brands. Elena felt moved. She remembered her mother's old sewing machine, which she now kept in her office as a reminder of her starting point. She had proven that pure creativity and hard work are currencies far more valuable than fake connections. Upon her return to Indonesia, Elena received a report from Maya about someone who kept sending apology letters to the office. The letters were from Adrian. However, the contents were no longer requests to collaborate again or pleas for funds. Adrian wrote about what he learned in the fabric warehouse. He spoke of his regret for having only seen fashion as a tool for wealth, rather than a work of art involving many human hands. Elena read the letters without overwhelming emotion. She felt relieved that Adrian was finally starting to learn about the reality of life. However, Elena remained firm in her principles. She would not pull Adrian back into her life or her business. To her, the past was a lesson, not a place to return to. She replied to Adrian's last letter with one short sentence. Continue your work there. It is the best place for you to truly know the meaning of a process. Day after day passed, and the Lana brand continued to grow. They began opening branches in several major cities in Asia. Elena was now known not only as a designer but also as an icon of change. She used a portion of her profits to build fashion schools for underprivileged children, ensuring that there would never be another Elena who had to struggle alone under the shadow of the wrong person. Adrian saw the news of Elena's success on the television in the foundation's break room. He smiled thinly, a sincere smile without envy. He realized that his greatest regret was not the loss of wealth, but the fact that he had once thrown away the only person who was most sincere in his life. Now, he had to bear the consequences by living a new life, far from the stage lights and the luxury that once blinded his eyes. 1 year has passed since the great storm that destroyed one name and gave birth to another. That morning, Elena stood on the balcony of her new headquarters, an eco-friendly building with modern architecture dominated by glass and greenery. Below, the city of Jakarta looked busy, but inside the Elena office, the atmosphere was calm and organized. Today was a historic day because Elena was going to inaugurate a scholarship foundation for traditional textile artisans across the country. The Lana brand was no longer just a viral local fashion label. They had transformed into a major force in the global industry with permanent boutiques in Paris, Tokyo, and New York. However, what made Elena most proud was not the sales figures reaching hundreds of billions of rupiah, but the fact that she had managed to improve the welfare of more than 500 families of local weavers and tailors who now led much better lives. On her desk lay a prominent business magazine with Elena's face on the front cover. The headline was bold, "The Power of Honesty in Craftsmanship." Elena picked up the magazine. Looking at her own face, which now appeared much calmer and full of self-confidence. She remembered the difficult times in the small leaky house when she had to sew with minimal lighting. That experience had shaped her into a figure who could no longer be shaken by either praise or insults. Meanwhile, in a corner of the city far from luxury, Adrian lived a very different life. He was no longer working in the foundation's fabric warehouse. Instead, he had become a basic sewing instructor for street children at a social rehabilitation center. Adrian discovered that he had a hidden talent for teaching. He no longer sought the spotlight or the applause of investors. For him, seeing a child successfully sew a straight line on a piece of scrap fabric gave him greater satisfaction than all the lavish parties he used to attend. One afternoon, Adrian received a small package without a sender's name. Inside was a high-quality blank sketchbook and a set of professional sewing tools. There was no note inside, but Adrian knew exactly who the package came from. He touched the surface of the sketchbook with fingers that now bore scars from hard work. Tears rolled down his cheeks, not out of sadness but out of gratitude. He knew that Elena had forgiven him in her own way, even though they would never be together again. Adrian's greatest regret had turned into motivation to become a better human being. He realized that his words from a year ago were a poison that was most deadly to himself, yet at the same time became the most fertile fertilizer for Elena's growth. Adrian spent the rest of his day teaching, trying to atone for his past mistakes by sharing knowledge with those in need. He no longer dreamed of a big name. He only wanted to be useful to others. The inauguration ceremony for Elena's foundation was held with great solemnity at the National Arts Building. Maya, who now served as the president-director of Lena, gave a very emotional opening speech. She told the story of how Elena started everything from scratch with only an old sewing machine. When it was Elena's turn to take the stage, the entire audience stood and gave a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. In the front row, Elena's mother sat with teary eyes, looking at her daughter who had become a light for many people. True success, Elena said in her speech, is not measured by how many people kneel at your feet, but by how many people you manage to help stand tall beside you. I was once told that I was nobody without other people. As it turns out, that person was right. I am nobody without the artisans, without my team, and without the sincere support of those who believed in my dream. After the event ended, Elena declined the offer to celebrate at a 5-star hotel. Instead, she asked her driver to take her to her mother's old house on the outskirts of the city. She wanted to sit on the small terrace where she first started Lena. There, she looked at her mother's old sewing machine, which had now been cleaned and kept in a glass box as her personal monument. Elena realized that life is about a fair cycle. Adrian's arrogance had become the bridge for Elena towards success, while Adrian's fall became the path for him to find his lost identity. There was no more hatred in Elena's heart. Everything was exactly where it should be. That night, Elena wrote one last entry in her private diary. She wrote that the 1-month journey that had once terrified her was actually a 30-day journey toward true freedom. She closed the book with a sweet smile. Outside, the stars shone brightly, as if reflecting the brilliance of a diamond that was now clean from all the dust of the past. The story of the seamstress who was cast out and became the global queen of fashion would continue to be told by many. Not just as a story of revenge, but as a reminder to anyone who feels underestimated, that a person's true value is never determined by the mouths of others, but by the power within their own heart and hands. Lena had become more than just a brand. It had become a symbol for every woman who dares to walk away and never return to beg.